All right, so our next act is our executive director, Tim Chrisman, is going to have a conversation with Wayne Monteith from the FAA. We tried this format last month with an interview and just really brought the conversation to life. So we're going to try it again, one today and one tomorrow. So Tim is the executive director and co-founder of Foundation for the Future. A former CIA and Army intelligence officer, Tim supported the National Space Council and the Joint Staff at the Pentagon. He holds master's degrees in intelligence studies and international relations and affairs from American University. Mr. Chrisman is the author of the book Humanity in Space and of various articles about the expanse of our civilization in space. His next challenge and mission is to make space accessible, survivable, and ultimately routine enough to be very boring. Wayne Monteith was appointed to his current position as the Federal Aviation Administration's Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation in January of 2019 after retiring from the U.S. Air Force as a Brigadier General. In this role, he is responsible for regulating the safety of the U.S. commercial space transportation industry. Mr. Monteith's last U.S. Air Force assignment was operating the world's busiest spaceport, leading over 9,000 military, civilian, and contractor personnel. As the commander of the 45th Space Wing and director of the Eastern Range, he oversaw the successful execution of 66 space launches, 23 booster landings, and the first successful operational use of a fully autonomous flight. Welcome, Wayne and Tim. I'm really looking forward to your conversation.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, welcome, Wayne. It's great to have you here. I listened in on the talk you gave a couple months back with the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, where you really sort of pulled back the curtain behind how and what FAA is doing, and you did it in an accessible way, and you did it, just like how the FAA's licensing tool for commercial spaceport licensing is more user-friendly than the majority of government sites. That's sort of the vibe you brought, and so I'm really excited we're able to bring you here to chat more.
Well, I appreciate the time, Tim, and I'm going to take just a little exception with the opening. I hope space never gets boring. Normal, yes. Semi-routine, absolutely. But I can tell you from my perspective, we see this industry right now. This is a second renaissance of space, and on a scale of boring to something else, it is so far from boring that I can't even put that outer bound on the right.
No, I'm with you. And when we talk about that, we're really thinking like I'm going to go get on a plane once I'm done talking with you. I don't know how that flies. I don't know why it flies. I just mindlessly get on. I fall asleep. I wake up. I'm there. And so that's the sort of background nature that we're trying to make space, and it can't be done without the work that you all there at the FAA are doing. And that begs the question, what brought you to the FAA? You have a long military career, launching running ranges, leading ICBM squadrons. What?
So it's a unique journey. I would say interesting as well, and one that was incredibly full of opportunity and tremendous mentors. But the journey really started all the way back in high school. I was fortunate to have grown up in Hawaii and lived on an Air Force base. My father served in the Air Force, and I could ride my bike down to the end of the runway and watch F-4 Phantoms take off. And we were also very near Honolulu International. So I had just a tremendous love of aviation early. And as a matter of fact, as soon as I was able, my best friend and I learned how to fly, got our private pilot's licenses in high school. And so, now we fast forward a little bit, and when I got to college, I was super interested in physics, mathematics, and computer science. And that was all going well until I ran into or decided I wanted to join ROTC, and I originally wanted to fly, but unfortunately my eyesight wouldn't allow it. But I did decide I wanted to go in operations. And so they had me change my degree, and I ended up with a degree in geography focused on climatology and remote sensing, so the environment, and came in as a nuclear weapons officer into the Air Force, and eventually transitioned into space, and just fell in love with all things space. And that last assignment we talked about really kind of brings this all home. So not only was it operational in launching rockets, but I was also responsible for 3 airfields. So I understood a little bit about airports. I understood about air traffic control, and absolutely understood about safety. So all of those core things that the FAA does, I never expected to come back into government service. I certainly never, I didn't expect to move back to Washington, D.C. I did both of those things. And I stayed fully retired for a grand total of 6 weeks before I transitioned from the Air Force to the FAA. But that's because this job seemed perfectly suited for my background. And it was an opportunity to work with some tremendous professionals throughout the FAA and in my organization, and hopefully to make a difference.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like you were, groomed for this position. I'm former Army guy, and so I very, well understand the idea that, you're put in a position and told, no, you're not gonna like it now, but you will later. And that's what it sounds like happened to you with this, because I mean, just the running multiple airfields while also managing space launches seems like the ideal thing to have as you're going in, when a lot of the talk now is almost how do we transition space launch from this once in a while thing to almost the commercial aviation model of routineness, and bringing those lessons in. What can we learn from that transition in commercial air flight?
So I think that the biggest lesson learned is something I was told a couple of years ago when I got into this job. As a regulator, we can either be inhibitors or accelerators. The industry is going to move forward, particularly in this dynamic time. And so we choose, consistent with public safety, to be accelerators wherever possible. How do we keep the public safe by also allowing innovation in this dynamic industry? And I think that's critical. And you talked a little bit about, the kind of the growth that we're seeing. I think it's important to kind of cage the audience's perspective on where we are. So just 1 decade ago, 2011, my office only licensed a single commercial space launch for the entire year. Fast forward 5 years, and we were at 11 launches. So we went from 1 a year to 1 about every 5 weeks. We're now about every 5 days. It is incredible that the pace that we're seeing. And as a matter of fact, it was interesting. I've been here at the FAA for about a little over 2.5 years now. We have our current count of licensed launches, commercial launches that we've done, sits at about 414. A quarter of those have occurred since I arrived. 1/4. And so when you look at that, and you also look at the difference between 2016 and now, we are projecting we're going to see a 400% increase in cadence. It is incredible what's going on. And so again, we're in the middle of it, whether we want to be or not, and we do want to be there, but we can either allow this industry to innovate and go forward, or we can slow them down unnecessarily. And I'll kind of close this little bit with, as being responsible for public safety, it is our job, when required, to every now and then just tap the brakes on the pace that industry is moving. And we do it with the lightest tapping of the brakes that is necessary to make sure that our industry continues to be safe. They all want to be safe, but sometimes, you just got to slow down a little bit and say, let's just make sure. Because in those 414 launches that we've licensed, we have never had a serious injury or fatality to a member of the uninvolved public. And you got to keep in mind, these are controlled explosions, every single launch. And so, I would say that's an enviable safety record.
Oh, absolutely. You're replacing the payload of a nuclear missile and putting humans in it and saying, see you in a bit. It's truly staggering how this works and how we're, involved in this. And so, bordering on 500 launches, no fatalities is pretty impressive.
And it's, if we look across the industry that, for the first 50 plus years of spaceflight, is primarily a government function and did a phenomenal job. But what we're seeing now with so much focus of this in the commercial industry is we're really seeing revolutionary change, not just evolutionary from the days of Goddard. We're seeing revolutionary change with autonomous flight safety systems, with flybacks. When you can reuse or refly a rocket booster 10 or more times, can fundamentally changes the landscape that we're seeing and really opens up that aperture for more and more companies, satellite companies, or private citizens to be able to get to space or experience space.
Yeah, no, it's exciting, and in many ways this was the promise of the space shuttle that we never really realized, and to see it coming is so cool. And no, and when I was laughing a little bit when you were saying, it's you as the regulator's job to occasionally lightly tap the brakes. And every morning when I get up, I have a huge list of space-related news and policy stories, and any of those brake tappings is 50 or more news articles about how could the FAA be doing this. But when you read into it, all that's happening is you all asked for some information. And so an enviable position to be in, to be sure.
Well, I can tell you when I show up on the wrong side of Twitter, with anybody who's got millions of followers, I can tell you the 8 people who follow me on Twitter are outraged because they understand what I do. But that's just part of the job, and we understand that. And at the end of the day, in my statute, in Title 51 of the U.S. Code, it actually says regulate only to the extent necessary. And I embrace that. We don't want to regulate to 101%, never to 110%, but only to the extent necessary to protect the public property, and the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States. And that's it. And I think we've been relatively successful thus far.
Yeah, no, and I think the track record and the pace of how fast you all have been able to scale, and if I'm right, without adding a ton of new people, as the throughput's increased.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when I talk about our staffing and our budget, I never start with, in the last 5 years, we've increased the size of our staff by 15%, because people are like, their first response is, well, bloated government bureaucracy. But when you put it in the environment that our workload has gone up over 400%, that 15% increase to keep pace with industry doesn't seem that terrible a price to pay, because our industry, the U.S. commercial space or space transportation industry, absolutely leads the world. And it's appropriate because it's an economic driver. It's a driver for national security. It's, quite frankly, it's even a driver for STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in our next generation. You can get excited a little bit watching a rocket launch on television, but there's nothing like seeing a rocket launch in your own backyard from a place like Cape Canaveral or the iconic Kennedy Space Center.
Yeah, no, and both my kids are at least moderately interested in space, one a lot more than the other. And we were talking earlier about how her 10th birthday is coming up and about like what she would want to do. And, you know, she would want to see a launch from Cape Canaveral rather than Disney right next door in Orlando. And I tell her all the time, like, you're not right in the head, kid.
Yeah.
But I like it. So
And you can do both.
go. Exactly. You can do both. And, you know, as we've seen this proliferation of spaceports around the country, I'm sure you're asked all the time, how many is the right amount? And of course, the answer is just enough. But is there, you know, a continued appetite for more spaceports around the country?
You know, it's an interesting question, and I'm not sure what the right answer is because it really depends on industry and the continued growth in industry. What I believe you're going to see is, and we're already starting to see this. You know, most of the launches today occur on the two big federal ranges, which is on the Eastern Range, which is Florida, and the Western Range, Vandenberg Space Force Base out in California. But they have natural capacity limiters. In California, it's because the launch sites, the launch pads are lined up north-south. So if you've got a rocket sitting on the southern launch pad, you don't want somebody launching over the top of you, rightfully. And at Cape Canaveral and Kennedy, they're just running out of space for available new launch pads. So there's natural constraints there. And so then you have to look forward. Do you want access to space to be your limiter to be successful in space? And my suggestion would be no. And the way we're set up right now is we don't go out and actively say, okay, for instance, New Hampshire, you need to stand up a spaceport so that you can be part of this. But if New Hampshire comes to us and says, hey, you know, we want to have a spaceport in our state or our local county, then we will evaluate that. And we don't evaluate the business part of it. There are two primary things we do on a spaceport. Number one is safety, of course, public safety, but even more so the environmental aspect. Can you be environmentally sound? And because it takes a significant amount of time to make it through the licensing process, you don't actually have to have an actual rocket provider as part of your application. So it's really a two-part process. So on the spaceport side, it's really heavy environmental and less so safety, which means you only have to have a notional vehicle and a notional plan to get to space, like a single launch azimuth. But once you get that spaceport license, then if a rocket provider, a launch provider comes in, now we really shift to far more focus on safety and less focus on environmental. Not that environmental isn't important, but a lot of that work has already been done on the spaceport side. So it's really a two-part process that we found works really well, because if you happen to be a launch provider and you say, I want to start launching from New Hampshire, and you go to New Hampshire, it could be 3, 4, 5 years before you complete that spaceport portion, which means then as a launch provider, you've probably already looked to go somewhere else.
Yeah. No, and I was just talking with Maine's state Department of Economic Development and saying like, look, you know, this is the application you put in for your spaceport. It doesn't need to be real in a sense that you have the full plan. You need to have what it's going to look like, where it's going to be. You can fix the rest, you know, while you're licensing in post-production, as they say in Hollywood.
Right. It's really about who's going to come in and fly there. That's really where the safety, you know, and that's why the environmental is so important up front. And, you know, that's another thing that brought me to the FAA, because they are so focused. They are all also focused on the environmental aspects and making sure that operators are good neighbors. You know, one of the most important things we did at Cape Canaveral was maintain the most prolific endangered sea turtle breeding ground in North America. That was all on the property that I was responsible for. And so again, it's another nice connection, but we want to make sure they're environmentally sound. And it's we refer to it, you know, on the spaceport side, is you're planning on a notional vehicle. So a small class, medium class, or a big heavy rocket. And then we'll evaluate that to the extent that we can. But if you're a rocket provider coming in, now we start that process over to make sure that we maintain that perfect safety record.
Yeah, no, and I mean they're really two sides of the same coin. Is what it sounds like. And the whole topic of this month's event is sustainability in space, and as we saw with Columbia and Challenger, not having the safety there put a grinding halt to a lot of ambitions and dreams. And so every bit as much as recycling in space, having mechanisms in place to prevent accidents, and then the trust that if there is one, the regulators are going to come in on the backside and review it and evaluate what happened, and we don't just need to start from square one. Sounds like those are two sides of what you're working on.
It absolutely is. And I would say, though, that, even with the shuttle program, NASA is the premier space engineering organization in the world. And those were tragic and unfortunate accidents that we hope to never see again. But, when we come in and notionally about somewhere on the order of 10 to 15% of the launches that we license experience some sort of mishap. Now, the first thing people think of are the big fireworks type displays, but that's some of them. But more often than not, it's something didn't go according to plan. So an engine throttled back a little bit early, or you were just a little bit off course, or something else occurred. And so what we have done is shifted our focus over the last couple of years, that rather than wait, and we oversee all of these investigations, and sometimes we conduct the investigations ourselves, but rather than wait till the entire investigation is complete, because that also includes mission success, we work diligently with the companies to validate that the safety systems work as advertised and would work as advertised again. In other words, we clear the safety case so that when the company is ready to return to flight, again, we don't become an impediment unnecessarily to their return to flight. And so as much as we are interested in mission success, it's not in our core responsibility. It's public safety.
Well, and as you were saying that, I was thinking, if one of the engines on my plane home this afternoon throttles back at the wrong time, I sure would like an investigation as to why. And so, this just seems like sort of natural things that we should be all getting behind. Yeah,
it really is, and quite frankly, the FAA has got a tremendous record of being a successful safety organization, and quite frankly, our administrator Steve Dixon refers to safety as our North Star, which I think is appropriate for space folks. He's all in on space, but we really do. We embrace it throughout the organization that it's safety first, safety always.
Yeah. No, and I wanted to shift gears there a little bit and talk about, I am a non-scientist coming into the space community. A lot of the people on here are as well, and it's indicative of the space economy that's moving away from rocket scientists and almost Olympic level astronauts. What, as you look out and are looking into the future, what are those careers and trades that you are most excited to see emerging here?
Well, before I get into that, first thing I'll say is we still need STEM, and we need a lot. We seem to run out of engineers long before we run out of engineered jobs, and so it's important that we do our part to help excite and prepare the next generation of rocket scientists and engineers going forward. But one of so there are many different opportunities here. Everything from if you look at the aviation industry, there is a whole secondary industry that's built up around that. Whether it's mechanics, maintainers, logistics folks, folks running the airports, flight attendants worried about safety constantly, travel agents, all of those things. But I would tell you something that I find really intriguing. Now, if you went back got back in your Wayback Machine and talked to young Wayne Monteith back in high school, and you gave me the option of being an airline pilot or a rocket pilot, I can tell you the direction I would have leaned. And it would certainly be to be a rocket pilot. And that's what we're seeing today with operations like Virgin Galactic. You actually have pilots trained to fly essentially a rocket ship. So this is almost, for those of you, again, we'll go back in the Wayback Machine, this is kind of Buck Rogers, long before warp drive, that we had this excitement. And so I think the aperture is completely wide open, and not just for technical degrees. At some point probably in the very near future, we're going to have more creative folks, artists and stuff going into space and bringing their experiences back, which again will hopefully help excite the entire community, and especially those folks that are not yet in our community.
Yeah, no, and that's really one of the goals of this event, is bridging that divide and being an accessible place for those who aren't on the inside and may feel intimidated by the technical details, or scared they won't understand, and trying to provide an accessible entry point there. As space is becoming this more mainstream area, and as you talked about, if we're doing it on the ground, we're probably going to need it in space. If you could convince the public one thing about space, what would that be?
I would work to shift the narrative that space isn't important. Space is absolutely important. We've seen it throughout our history. Whether it's GPS, which allows us to have exquisite communications, to be able to use an ATM at the gas station. All of these secondary things, I'll go to the old, the old joke or analogy that, I don't need no stinking satellites. All I need is my handheld GPS device. And it's like, well, that's an interesting concept, but how important space is, from that to microprocessor advances, to, quite frankly, solar cells, all of those things that we utilize here on the planet that we take for granted. And if you really are truly interested in affecting climate and affecting climate change positively, and being concerned about our environment, there's really no better way to get a sense of how the Earth is evolving, and how the Earth, and I'll use absolutely a non-scientific term, but how the Earth feels without sensors in space that be able to take that holistic view of the entire planet. And so I think it's critically important for folks to understand that the dollars that are spent in space translate directly and indirectly to our quality of life and the future of our planet here. And quite frankly, whether you look back to when we were a seafaring nation or an aviation nation, as humans, we're explorers. And it's time to push the bounds. It's time to go off world and create or turn science fiction into science reality, whether it's going to Mars, or it's warp drive, or maybe a flux capacitor, who knows. But all of those things are in the realm of the possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's a phenomenal way to look at it. When I talk to people who are saying, we should fix the Earth first, I talk about how, we're not, shooting kinetic projectiles at Mars or the moon and just ramming them into the ground and, it's filled with billions of dollars. I'm like, no, these are, dozens, if not hundreds of prototypes of systems we can use here on the ground. Not all of them are going to work, but a lot of them end up making our lives insanely better. And so, yeah, I think you're exactly right there. I know we're at time, and so I want to offer you a chance for any closing comments before we transition out.
Well, Tim, I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you. And as we talk about the environment, and I'm confident that y'all have addressed this and will continue to address it, but we can't forget how important space sustainability is as well. And being good stewards of that environment, because quite frankly, if you don't have a safe environment, there is no business, there is no exploration. If you can't get to space, none of the rest of it exists. So I think it's critically important as we go forward, particularly as we see these super constellations go up, that we're also cognizant of our responsibility to protect that environment, which is fragile, around our planet. And it needs to be built into our system. And quite frankly, we need to move forward with making sure things don't continue to bump into each other, and encourage those companies who are looking to find innovative ways to remove debris that's already on orbit. And so, the environment here is precious, and as is, our near Earth environment as well. And we have a responsibility to take care of it.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Wayne.
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Lee, again.
Thank you, Wayne. It's always great to hear such passion and animation from a regulator. It's really, really fun to see how excited you are about everything that's going on.
Thanks again.